Hi, on today's episode, we'll be doing a diagnostic and repair on the i3 Mini. We'll be looking at the hot end, replacing a thermistor, and getting it back up and running, so stay tuned. Welcome back. So this is a customer's printer. It's come in for repair, and there's a couple little issues. The customer's been a good client of ours, and she's been using this printer for quite a while and getting some really good prints off of it. She had a couple issues with the extrusion. It was a little bit of a clogged nozzle onto it, and she tried to do a little bit of the repairs herself, but wasn't quite sure what was happening. So she sent it in to us for repair. So we know so far that there's a little bit of an issue on the hot end. There's a clogged nozzle. This ptfe liner right here looks pretty chewed up. And from what I can tell, it looks like we might need a new thermistor as well. So we're gonna start in here and get it apart. I'm gonna start off with our Allen key here. The i3 Minis are a nice printer, but they can be a little bit of a challenge to disassemble, just because there's so many smaller components on it and it's much more tightly integrated. So our first step, what we wanna do here is take off the cooling fan. So let's take our Allen key and take out the two screws here. A lot of the screws and a lot of the hardware on this printer is relatively the same across the board, so we don't have to worry about mixing up our screws too much. Okay. The fan we're just going to put out of the way right here for now. Second thing we'll want to do is we want to take off this ptfe. A lot of people have trouble taking the ptfe out, but it's really quite simple. These Bowden couplers right here, these ptfe couplers right here, have a little press fitting on the top. You can see it right there. All we want to do is just press down hard on the coupling and then pull up on the ptfe. And with luck, the ptfe will come right out of the extruder, or right out of the hot end like that. You can see it's a little bit chewed up here, it's a little bit worn out. It doesn't look burnt or melted at all, so that's a good sign, but it's probably worn out enough that we'll replace it anyways. With the ptfe out of this area here, we're just going to carefully unscrew the coupler right here while holding the hot end and take out our coupler. We'll put that off to the side, and now our hot end will come right out like so. So visual inspection doesn't seem to be too much. I'm going to take a small Allen key here and just put it down the center of the hot end just to see if I can feel any sort of obstructions here. It's going right down all the way in. We can see here it's going right down to the tip of the Allen key. If I pull it back, we can see that that's going all the way down, if I flip it around this way, all the way down into the heat break. So looks like we might have got lucky here, and it could possibly just be a bad ptfe tube. So one thing to point out though that we've just noticed here is looking at the thermistor here. The customer did say that the thermistor had come out of the hot end while she was printing, and that led to a bit of an issue and eventually caused the printer to shut down. It does appear to be that the wires are a little bit crushed and it could possibly be damaged. So we're going to go ahead and replace the thermistor on that. So to do so is a little bit more of an involved process for here. We'll have to basically take these panels off here, the bottom enclosure, to get to the thermistor connector on the board before we can place it all. So let's get started. Okay, our first step here is to get this nice wiring loom off. This cover is really nice. It keeps all the wires really nice and bundled together, but it also makes getting things apart a little bit difficult. So we're just going to carefully snip off all these zip ties here. 1, 2, and the third one up top here. 3. This wrap is a little bit of a spring-loaded kind of wrap, so it will have a tendency to curl back over on itself. But we'll carefully just start peeling some of it off back here. And it can be a little bit tricky, so it's usually a lot easier to take it off than it is to put it back on. And the remaining of the wrap goes down into the side covers here. For ease of access here, we'll see if we can get away with just removing the one side panel on the back here. We should be able to. We're going to take our smaller Allen key, long size one. It's our 2mm Allen key we're looking for here. And we're going to carefully take off all the screws holding the side panel in place. There is an internal structure to this printer, so taking off this panel is not going to reduce the rigidity or the strength of this printer We'll have to recalibrate anything for that. It'll come off nice and easy. So there's 2 screws over on this side here. We have a third located on this other edge, and then several along the front face right here. And the cover will remove just like so. We've got a few more wire ties here. This cable we see on the outside here is just the extruder motor cable itself. So we can snip those off carefully, making sure not to snip any of the wires themselves. Like so. Like so. And there's a last one right here at the base going into the bottom of the electronics enclosure here. And we'll carefully get down in there. And snip that off as well. Okay. And then, if we're lucky, we can pull off the end of the sheathing right here and begin to pull it off from the rest of the wiring. Just like so. Okay. With that out of the way right now, all we left to do on this side of the printer, I'll turn around to this side so we can see a little easier, is we're going to take out the heater cartridge, and the thermistor itself fell out on its own. The thermistor is just held in place by this little screw right here. So in a proper installation, this screw will fit down the center of the 2 wires, and the head of the screw will hold the thermistor in place. And the thermistor itself will slot into this little tiny hole right there in the block. The key to this is you want to get the screw tight enough that it holds the thermistor in place and it doesn't fall out, but not tight enough that it crushes the wires. You can see on this thermistor here that the wires are extremely flat, they're twisted over, and generally it's probably broken one of the leads in the thermistor here. So it's a little bit of a balancing act just between being tight but not too tight, but we'll get to it when we do. So then our last screw right here is the one on the heater block itself. When you look at your heater block, you'll notice that you'll first think, wow, my heater block is bent. You'll see that this bottom edge here is bent upwards. That's by design. The screw here fits through both sides of the heater block, and by tightening this screw, tightens the lower half of this block onto the heater cartridge and basically compresses the heater cartridge into place and keeps it held in place. It's a nice design because it means that we're not taking a screw and putting a screw into the heater block, not damaging it that way. Keeps things nice and easy for us. So we'll see if we can get this off. There's a little bit of residue from a previous print, so hopefully we won't have too much problems with that. Easier said than done. Okay, well, a little bit of a change of plans here. We weren't able to get the heater cartridge out. The screw holding it into place is either fused from the filament, and the head's also a little stripped out from the factory. So not a big deal. We're going to continue on taking off the rest of the electronics here and getting this off, and we'll replace it with a whole new hot end right now. So at this point, before we get too far, we'll get rid of the easy stuff here first. We'll take off the remainder of the ptfe tube here. So again, just pushing down on the top of the collet here, nice and hard, and we should be able to pull it right out like so. ptfe does wear out over time. You'll see that if it's exposed to high temperatures, it will start to discolor, it will wear down eventually. With the movements of the printer as well, where the ptfe fits into the couplings, you will get some scoring. It will sometimes bend, collapse on itself a little bit. It's a replaceable item, but these connectors make it nice and easy. Just push down the connector, you can pull it right out, pop a new one in, and you're good to go. So with that out of the way right now, we've got quite the mess of wiring. We're going to flip this over on its back, get to the electronics, disconnect the heater cartridge, disconnect the thermistor, and pull this wiring right out altogether. So to do so, now we've got a backside here, we're just going to lay the printer over on its side like so, and keep our wiring out of the way here so it's not in our way. And we'll start taking off all these screws here. Okay, sorry about that. There's quite a few screws to take off on here. One thing we want to be careful about when we do remove this fan is connected to the motherboard itself, so we just want to be careful when we rotate this down. And hopefully, if I'm careful, I can rotate it around like that and not put too much stress on it. Now you'll see this is the motherboard right here. It is integrated with the LCD screen and the touch or the control knob itself. It's a very small little setup, very compact. Over here we've got our main primary power supply that powers the whole printer. This is connected to the fused plug right here for your 110 volt input. This is your Z drive motor attached to your lead screw, and this is, oh my apologies, this is backwards. This is your Y-axis motor driving your bed back and forth, and this is your Z-axis motor right there for the lead screw that drives it in the Z-axis. So very carefully, and forgive me as I'm looking at this upside down, I'm going to have to identify which one of these is the thermistor and which one of these is the hot end. The hot end is actually buried here in the back. It is these orange and green connectors there. And our thermistor is right here, our fourth connector in. It's labeled nicely on the controller board. It is labeled temp. So carefully, we can unplug that. And we will undo this zip tie here. Like so. And very carefully, we're going to try and not disturb too much of this wiring. I'm just going to disconnect the fan here so we can get this out of the way and give us a little bit more room to work on. Okay. You can see how nicely packaged everything is here, but it does make servicing it a little bit more difficult. Okay, that's out of the way there. That's out of the way there. So if we're careful, should be able to snip another zip tie here. Get that out of the way. This is our main cables going to the board itself, and then the secondary cables going into this orange extruder block, or orange block here, is for the hot end. So there's the thermistor. Oh, we've got one more zip tie right down here at the bottom, just underneath the Z motor. It's a little hard to see. We'll snip that. A lot of these zip ties are great for shipping, and it keeps everything in place, doesn't keep things rattling around. When replacing this yourself, it's important to make sure that all your wiring is nicely tucked away and not rubbing on motors and so forth. But if you can't get every single zip tie onto it that came off, it's not the end of the world. And with a bit of luck, we should be able to. There we go. Just like so. So our thermistor is out. Wasn't that bad. And we'll just put it over to the side right here for now. So, oh, okay. So we got a little bit of work to do here. These orange terminal blocks should just pull out. Now you'll see when we did pull this out that the power lead here, the 12 volts going to the printer board itself, did come out. That's not a huge deal, it does happen. These are just little screw terminals. So we're just going to take our screwdriver here and just back out the screw as far as it can here till it's nice and loose. And if you look closely on the connector itself, you see there's a little silver box basically. What you want to ensure is that as the screw goes down, it'll basically force the top of this little silver metal box onto the wire itself and compress the wire and make the connection. You always want to make sure that that wire is going into the box and not above the little compression itself. Some people do get that mixed up, or it doesn't make a good contact, or it's not all the way in there, and it causes a little bit of a short and not enough voltage going to the printer and not enough power, and it can lead to all sorts of different issues. So just make sure that that wire is firmly seated in the connector itself, and then just tighten down the screw. want to make sure it's nice and snug. I'll do the same thing for the other screw as well. Don't want to over tighten these either. This is just some plastic housing, so you can actually strip it out and break these connectors pretty easily. Give them both a good tug. Should be nice and solid. We're good to go. So on our board, the first connector here is the 12 volts for the printer itself, and our second board, or our second connector here, sorry, is the hot end itself. Always make sure that you're doing this when the printer's not plugged in. Doing stuff like I've just done here can short out components and make your printer even much, much worse. So I'm just going to carefully pull out the hot end, like so. And in our case here, we're going to replace the heater cartridge on the hot end. So we're just going to undo both of these screws here. Nice thing about heater cartridges on printers is they don't have polarity, so there's no plus or minus, red or black, there's no earth or anything like that. So they can basically just be plugged in any which way. And we'll take that out like that. When your wires do come out like this, and you can see this is a perfect example, is that a lot of these wires are actually folded back on each other. So I don't know how much of that was actually making contact with the actual terminal itself, but we'll just carefully fold the wire back over nice and straight. And I always like to give it a bit of a twist here so that all the strands are nice and tight together. Gives a nice bigger contact area, makes current flow much easier, reduces the actual heat going through the connector, and just makes your life much, much easier overall. Reduces fire, that kind of stuff. Do the same thing here. Like so. Now, mind you, we're going to replace this heater cartridge. It's not really necessary. Our new ones are nice, but it's a good thing to watch out for. So with that out of the way, if I'm careful, we can pull that right out, and our hot end's gone. Now, this is not a wasted hot end at this point. Well, we will be able to take the screw out eventually to get it out, get the nozzle off, and possibly reuse the hot end at a later date. But for purposes here for repair, it just makes sense to put a whole new hot end into place. Okay, so let's get this baby back together and up and printing. So first things first, we're just going to route this wire back, connect our main 12 volts back up to the printer. So carefully just slot it into its connection there. And this next bit's going to be a little bit tricky because we'll have to flip the printer over. And put the main connector for the hot end off to the side here and flip our printer back up. I'm going to take our brand new heater cartridge right here and I'm going to carefully slot this through the, if I flip this over this way, through our connection here, down through the base and into the electronics bay. Okay. So we'll just try to make sure that I'm not crossing any wires or snagging anything. Come down here and leave that right there for now. And I'm just going to slot it carefully through the electronics base. We'll get that in a minute. And then we're going to do the same thing for our thermistor as well. Okay. We'll snug up all the wire links afterwards, get everything else nice once we get everything connected on the electronics board. Okay, with that out of the way, we'll flip our printer back over on its side and connect everything up to the electronics. Perfect. Okay, so here is our thermistor, and we've just got to find where the hot end went to, which is right here. Okay. So all I'm going to do here is just route the thermistor underneath the stepper motor, and we'll route it back over here. The nice thing about these connectors is that they can only go in one way, so they're very easy to click in. Fourth connector over, it's marked temp on the board. And then we will do the same. Snake it through. Now from the factory they've put a little bit of heat shrink over top of the wires. We'll just pull that off. Give the wires a nice twist here to make sure the strands are nice and tight. There's good contact between everything. Like so. Now we will see these might be a little bit long for the terminal. We'll see how far they stick out. And we'll just stick this into the terminal. That's not bad. They stick out just a little bit, but that's pretty good, so we'll use that. Take our screwdriver and carefully tighten down the terminal. Give it a good pull. It's not coming out. We're good and solid. Do the same thing on this side as well. Remember to hold it in place. They're both nice and solid. We can come over here. I like to route this around the motor here and carefully, it's a little tricky, just snap it into place there. So at this point, I'm going to take some of our zip ties and try and put some of the zip ties back here and just clean up the wiring a little bit. Not the most exciting job, but it just makes everything a little bit neater, keeps it out of harm's way, and helps the airflow on the bottom of this base as well. One there. See if we can get one around here. You always want to leave a little bit of slack on the wires, that way if things do move around, that it's not going to pull on any of the cables or on any of the connectors, sorry, and cause anything to come out of place. Like so there. Okay. And that should be fine. So we'll just verify again. Thermistor is plugged in, hot end's plugged in, no other loose connectors on the board. Everything looks good. I think we're good. Let's put the bottom cover back on and we'll put the rest of it back together. Now when we go put the bottom cover back on, don't forget to connect the fan back up. We'll carefully see if I can rotate this in place. And it is the third connector over, right next to the thermistor. Like so. Always helps when you're facing the right way around to work on this. It's always tricky upside down. Okay, so now we'll get this back together. Okay, now that we've got our wires run for the thermistor and the heater cartridge here, we're going to reattach our hot end and wire everything back up on the tool head here before we clean up all the wiring. So we've got our new hot end right here. It looks very similar to the old one now. The heatsink is a bit different, but it's just the different styles that they run. Some are hexagonal, some are just slotted, slightly different changes. The biggest difference in this hot end though is the cooling block is no longer slotted, or sorry, the heater block is no longer slotted. It's a solid single piece slot or block with just a small grub screw to hold the cartridge in. It does approximately the same thing. So we're just going to take off our ptfe coupling here and put that to the side for right now. And we're just going to carefully sort out our wiring mess here, like so. This is for our fan, so we will put this off to the side here for now. So let's take our heater cartridge and we will slot this through. Always want to keep your heater cartridge more or less centered in the block like so. And hopefully I've got the right size Allen key right here. Perfect. We're just going to tighten down the grub screw here, or the set screw. And we don't want to tighten it down too much. If we tighten it down too much, we'll actually end up compressing this heater cartridge, deforming it, and it could end up completely stuck in the hot end here. So just tight enough that the heater cartridge doesn't want to move out of the block, but not tight enough to deform it. Okay, so with that in the way, we're going to put our thermistor in now. This is probably the tedious part, but we'll see what we can do here. So I am going to grab, excuse me for a second, I'm going to grab the set screw from the previous hot end, And we're going to take that off because we'll use that on the new one. Okay, I'll put that off to the side. So what I like to do is our thermistor is completely straight like this. And you can see that it fits into the hole here and then wraps around. So what I like to carefully do is very carefully just kind of pinch the thermistor bead so it's L-shaped like so. Just helps keep it in place a little bit nicer. I'm going to carefully slot it into the tricky part. Spread open these cables just a bit. Okay. Now spread open these wires, and probably what I'm going to do is start this screw in just a little bit. I don't want to keep the screw in too long, just long enough that I can try and show this for you guys. Slot it into the block and around the screws, okay? So with it around the screw like so, I'm going to just start tightening it down. And again, I want to make sure that the head of the screw is contacting both the wires nice and tight, which it is. And I'm just going to, again, not tighten it down too much that we're snapping the wires, but tight enough that it's not going to move around on us. Check it, nice and snug, just like so. And actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reverse the heater cartridge so that both the wires exit on the same side. Makes wiring just a little bit neater, a little bit nicer. One. So again, don't over tighten, just make it nice and snug, like so. Perfect. So just to make sure that we don't strain any of our wires, I'm just going to put a zip tie along both the heater cartridge and the thermistor, just enough that we're not snagging on anything and possibly pulling out the thermistor while we're putting this back together. Okay, so we can kind of begin to put this back together now. So I'm going to temporarily, let's see if we can mount. Yeah, we'll run it right there like that. Okay, the wires run. I'm just going to temporarily thread our Bowden or ptfe connector, or Bowden connector if you want to call it, back into the hot end. And like so. Good for now. And I'm going to probably just put a zip tie here just to hold our end stop cables together as well. Keep everything nice and tight. Like so. Perfect. Okay. With our hot end mostly back together on this, we can reattach our fan. And that's the two M3x8 screws. I always keep grabbing the wrong Allen key here. And we'll just thread those in there. And grab our second one. Okay. Okay. That's good there, good there. In fact, I'm going to take this zip tie off that we just put on and put a new one on that snags or catches our fan cable as well. Just to keep the wiring nice and tight, nice and clean. Don't want it to snag on anything. You don't want it to hit on belts or catch in the fan, or even as the printer's printing, catch on your fingers or anything else. And some people, I like to carefully slot a zip tie through the cooling fin on the side here and zip it off there. That just adds a little bit of a strain relief to the cables so that when the tool head's moving around, it's not actually flexing any of the cables or any of the connectors. Just verify that everything looks nice and tight, everything looks good. Thermistor's in place, like so. And there. Okay. So with that out of the way, we just have to clean up the bird's nest of wiring on the back side here. So remember before we had quite the bird's nest here, so I'm going to carefully see if I can route some of this, like so. Okay. Some of this is a little longer than it needs to be. Okay. Okay. So right now, all that we got left to do on this side is just put the sheathing back onto all the wires here. It's a little tricky. Basically, all we're going to do is spread it around the wires, clean up the wiring loom here, get everything look nice and clean. And when we come back, we'll put the cover back on, get this fired up, and see how it prints. Well, welcome back. It was a little bit more work than it seemed. This wrap's a little bit of a pain to get on, but once it is, it cleans everything up nice and tight. It just basically splits apart in the middle, you wrap it around the wires, fiddle with it a little bit, and it'll go on nice. You can see the wiring is all nice and tied up. Put a couple zip ties on it just to keep everything out of the way of the Z motor. So at this point, we also want to double check that the length going from the top of the tower here to the extruder itself has plenty of travel. We'll also bring the extruder down, roughly to where it's touching the bed, and make sure that this is still nice and loose. That's as far out as it goes. We don't want anything snagging. We want this to be long enough that the extruder can reach its maximum position without having too tight of a cable. And that looks good. There's still plenty of play in it, so I'm happy with that. All that we need to do now is put the back cover on, and then we'll hook up the ptfe tube, and then power it up and make sure everything works. So goes back on just the same way it came off. Like so. And these are just the small, really tiny screws we got for this one. Okay, perfect. Back cover's on, double check, bottom cover's on. Okay, all we got left to do now, before we power it up, is put in our ptfe tube. So, what I'm gonna do here is take our tube, and I'm gonna grab the old one as well. We're just gonna measure roughly the same length for it. So about there, and just cut it with our clippers. Now, when you do cut it, you can cut this with scissors or side cutters, whatever you please. You always want to make sure that the end cut is not smushed down or compressed, and then it's also relatively straight. This is cut on a bit of an angle, so I'll just square it up a bit, like so. And if it's a little bit ovalish or flattened out, we'll just tweak it a little bit with our pliers until it looks nice and round. If you've got an appropriate sized Allen key, you can always stick the Allen key down the center of the tube too to kind of flare it out and make it back to round again. So for the hot end here, it's crucial on these style of hot ends. This is a E3D style clone. It's similar to a V5. It means that the ptfe goes down into the hot end, not to the heat break itself, but just close enough. So when we insert this into our Bowden coupler here, we want to continue pushing down until we feel it bottom out on the connector, or on the hot end itself. Like so. Okay. And then on this side, we're going to do the same thing and just push it into the extruder. Like so. Okay. And this is a little longer, which is okay. So we can also zip tie this off later and finish it up a little bit. But for this period right now, we'll just leave it as so. ptfe tube is installed. Hot end looks good. Everything's moving around the way it should. So let's power it up and see what we get. Okay, perfect. Our temperature is reading at 25 degrees. It's right around ambient temperature. It's the end of June in Canada. It's getting pretty warm in here. So all I'm going to do now is, forgive me, because I'm reading this upside down, and go to quick settings, and hopefully be able to heat this up. Preheat. Perfect. We'll let it get the temperature, we'll put some film into it, and we'll see what it does. So we're just going to load some of our neat filaments into the printer here, and it's at about 190 degrees right now, PLA. So we'll just load it in. I always like to manually load mine in here instead of using the extruder. Perfect. Now the nozzle on this printer was pre-tightened on this new hot end, sorry. So, but if we had to pre-tighten the nozzle, we just heat it up to about 220 degrees and then put a wrench on the nozzle and tighten it down. You can see that in our i3 Plus video, same process, just a slightly different hot end. Okay, so we seem to be extruding pretty well. Let's level the bed. Try and do this upside down. So I'll grab my piece of paper here that we'll use for setting the distance. And just like that. So with our bed leveled, let's see if we can get a print started. So there you have it. We've replaced the hot end, thermistor, and the heater cartridge on the i3 Mini. If you've got any questions, leave them in the comments below. Like our videos, and don't forget to click the notification bell as well. And subscribe to our YouTube page too. See you next time.